You only get one shot per week. New source of guaranteed myth track loot in patch 11.2 is the title of this article on Wowhead by Squishy, talking about what's going on with M0 Tazavesh. So previously, we learned about M0 Tazavesh. We knew it was going to be a mega dungeon, and we knew it was going to be relatively hard. Blizzard has stated in some of the pre-11.2 interview stuff that they were bringing back Tazavesh M0 as a mega dungeon. They were going to make it equivalent to a plus 10, but also award equivalent level gear. And this time they are bringing back the hard mode as well. And if you remember Dawn of the Infinites back in Dragonflight Season 3, Dawn of the Infinites, if you ran through it during the hard mode and you did the entire hard mode, the last boss could drop 1 to 2 pieces of myth track level gear. Now, things are a little bit different. One-shotting Deathless hard mode Tazavesh is a lot more compelling of an opportunity for pretty much everybody in the game. Because every player in a group which completes a Deathless Tazavesh on the first attempt of the week will earn a guaranteed piece of Myth 1 out of 6 loot, which is a very interesting proposition. So basically, what everybody thinks whenever you first hear this is, who am I going to be able to play with? What other 4 people can I get together to be able to do this? This is also going to be fantastic for like Mythic Plus and people who don't raid Mythic as well, to be able to get Myth track pieces of gear a little bit more frequently. And for raiders, they're looking at this thinking, oh, what 4 people in my guild are dedicated enough to not have deaths in Tazavesh? Because especially if you're in a Mythic raiding guild, some people just don't really care that much about doing dungeons and doing Mythic Plus. And so it's one of those things that trying to find a group, particularly the first couple of weeks of the season, going to be very interesting. But because the loot is just so compelling, being able to get 5 pieces of guaranteed Myth 1 out of 6 loot, that is a huge deal for your raid, a huge deal for your Mythic Plus group. It just accelerates your gear tremendously. If you think about it, if you're a Mythic Plus only player and you failed the hard mode Tazavesh for that week, you were getting half as much myth track potential. I mean, obviously you can craft some gear, but you're getting roughly half the amount because you're only going to be able to get some myth track gear out of the vault. So here's how things worked on the 11.2 PTR. All players started with the Street Smart buff on their character, which can be seen whenever they enter Tazavesh. This buff is removed for the entire party when any member of the party dies inside of Tazavesh. This fails the one-shot Deathless reward for the character. So I think in Dawn of the Infants, you could actually reset the dungeon as well if you made a mistake. This is this is not the case in Tazavesh. That will remove the Deathless reward for the character for that entire week for the entire party. If all players have the Street Smart, when a Deathless hard mode buff is completed, this completes the challenge. Which, I mean, that's a huge deal. And so then completing the challenge spawns a chest that awards a guaranteed piece of myth track gear for each player, which will be randomly selected from all the bosses of Tazavesh, which makes farming Tazavesh on Mythic Plus a little bit worse. Actually, I would say a lot of it worse, considering that you're going to want to be able to get all the stuff on myth track. Now, it is, of course, random. Other rewards. We did learn a little bit more about other rewards as well. If you don't manage to complete the one-shot Deathless, don't worry, you're still going to get some great rewards. Bosses drop hero 1 out of 6 loot. Completion of the Mega Dungeon rewards players with the plus 10 vault. And you get 30 Gilded Crests. I also heard a rumor that you are able to get a higher level starting keystone. I couldn't find any basic news on that. That's what the word on the street is. So it could be true. I would maybe do a little bit more research on that. I don't necessarily want to spread misinformation. They said technically two bosses have new hard mode mechanics compared to the Shadowlands versions. So Asmi now divides the arena into quadrants immediately. On Hillbrand, the console channeler now needs to communicate where the orbs go. This was basically the Shadowlands version, but now that is the hard mode version. And Time Captain Hooktail now spawns the ads with a buff, giving them immunity to first breath, the first infinite breath instead of the old functionality. So, going to be very interesting. So let's talk about some of this. There is a guide as to what's going on with the hard mode just in the bosses, and I did a read through these. I didn't try the hard mode on the PTR, but reading through some of the difficulties of these bosses, I can kind of gauge as to how difficult these are just because I have played through the dungeons on the PTR. First and foremost, Zofex. He is going to be played with trash mobs, particularly the Portalmancer Zohun. This mini boss is actually fairly difficult. You can line the Radiant Pulse, which is probably going to be the most important thing. That way, I would honestly focus down Portalmancer Zohan. That way, you don't deal with Zofex at the exact same time that you're dealing with Zohan. I think that's probably the best way of being able to do this. I don't think that this is going to be an easy encounter by any means. Second boss, Maya's Oasis. The reading, how this reads, is that there's going to be some slightly different hard mode challenges because there's going to be a different wave of ads that spawns, and the mechanics that are associated with it are different. Unstable goods, mailroom should be fine. You just get rooted. I think that the menagerie is one of the easiest places for people to have individual deaths. So Actualite spawns 28 seconds into the counter, which is how it works in Mythic Plus is it spawns whenever the bosses hit 50% HP. And Vinza Gold Fuse activates 65% in the encounter. This mechanic that you see on screen right here, where it's these orbs that are on the ground, I actually think that this is a pretty difficult mechanic just as is in M0, and a mechanic that is likely to take people out. The hard mode, it doesn't seem like it's that difficult, but I think that that boss is one where a lot of people can have one-off deaths. Triple technique from Soasmi, I think it's a little bit whatever. Hillbrand hard mode means that you're going to need to have people in voice. So I know a lot of people aren't excited for this kind of thing because now the console channeler is going to be required to communicate where players are going to be going, which basically means that you just like click the console and then you see the shapes, and then you have to tell people where the shapes are because it's not visible to the entire party. So Leah hard mode seems like it's going to be very difficult as well. The player which consumes the first 2 charges of each collapsing star will have a star vulnerability, which means that people are going to have to rotate in and out who's soaking. Players will also be sucked slightly towards the collapsing star for a couple seconds whenever the charge expires. And all 5 relics must be hit on the same Hyperlight Jolt cast, or they'll all reset before the next cast. That's a little bit different than what happens during Mythic Plus, where you can just like reshoot it and it's not that big of a deal. Time Captain Hooktail. I think that this fight and the Menagerie fight are probably going to be the 2 biggest points in which players are going to be depleting their Deathless run. Time Captain Hooktail was already a very difficult encounter where things like Anchor Shot and the Bombardment is just a really difficult mechanic. I think that tanks in general have been pretty bad with the Infinite Breath on the PTR, and getting it to hit the ads one time is already a difficult enough challenge. Having it need to hit the ads twice is going to be a huge deal. And so I think that these 2 bosses are going to be looking to gatekeep players at the very beginning. So now, just my general thoughts. I think this is like super cool. I think it's super cool for the game. I think it's going to be a pretty frustrating challenge for some people because players believe that they're entitled to gear in World of Warcraft just in general. And anytime that there's something that's gated behind difficulty, I think players tend to, get a little bit annoyed about this. I think that this is great. Personally, this is kind of the Mythic Plus equivalent to Mythic rating. There is a step up where there is something that you can do where you can go and do this hard mode Tazavesh with a group and be able to get rewarded with Myth track level gear. For Raiders, they view this as a way that they can also potentially get additional Myth track level gear, whereas in the past, Mythic Plus players viewed raiding as a way that they could get the Myth track level gear, but that's not something that they necessarily wanted to do. And so I think that this is super sweet as a way to allow Mythic Plus players to get more Myth track level gear more frequently. And so I think in that way, it's going to be nice. I think a lot of people are going to be very frustrated the first couple of weeks. I would just recommend taking your time and selecting your teammates wisely. If people played on the PTR and they have a general idea of what's actually going on in the dungeons, it's going to make it a lot easier. Playing it super slow, taking the trash super slow, I think is going to be beneficial because I don't think the trash in any of these dungeons, especially if you're playing like 1 pack at a time with cooldowns and stuff like that, isn't going to be too difficult. Now the bosses, I think that's where you can actually start to run into a lot of trouble. I would recommend like either watching a video or potentially even reading a guide prior to pulling each and every single one of the bosses. That way everybody kind of understands what their job is, because the worst thing that could happen, especially early on the first couple of weeks, is that you lose the opportunity to be able to get the Myth track pieces of gear. But I'm really interested in hearing what your thoughts are down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.